Hello everyone, and welcome to this tutorial on how to use the elevator system. So, we're going to hop right into things, and we're going to create the elevator game object. So we're going to do this by creating an empty object, and we're going to move it to, just so we can preview it, those coordinates there. So 0, 0, 12. And we're going to add in our elevator model under game object. So you can just drag that into there. And we're going to add a mesh collider to that. And we don't need the animator, so we're going to right click and remove that. That's optional, by the way. And then you add the elevator JavaScript, and we're going to name this to tutorial elevator. And we have set up the elevator. So now we can jump into configuring it. So you'll see it asks for an empty game object. Under prefabs, I have an empty game object made. So we're going to drag that onto here. And then it opens up the whole entire system to us. And that empty game object is there for reference and whatnot. We're going to move the tutorial elevator over to the first platform to a spot you're comfortable with. And I'm going to show you first how to set up a simple 2-point system. So say we just needed to get it from here over to here. We'd check the 2-point system box, and since we're going along the z-axis, we're going to offset it like that. And we're also going to turn down the general error. The general error, basically what that just means, is when the center of this game object here gets within one of these spheres, it's going to switch waypoints on us. We're going to turn down this general error to about 0.5. And under stopping parameters, we are going to say stop at all waypoints. And the period is how long it stops there. So it's going to go and it's going to stop at that waypoint, and we want it to stop for about 4 seconds so the player has a chance to get on. Alright, so if I go into the scene view now, we'll see it waits a moment, and then it goes over there. And I'm going to hop it into the game here. And when it comes over to me, I'm going to get on, and we'll see that we'll be boosted over to here. Alright, and it'll go back. So what you've just done is you've just created a very simple 2-point system elevator if you're following along. But that's not always what we want. In some scenarios, we're going to have stuff like an obstacle in the way, or we're going to want it to stop at multiple points. So we're going to need something better than a 2-point system to go through with this. So what we're going to do is we're going to uncheck 2-point system. And then we're going to go down to waypoint parameters, because what we're going to be using to do this is we're going to be using a waypoint system. So if I go to the top view to make things a bit easier, so we're going to want to avoid this, and then we're going to want to come back. So I'm going to hit add waypoint auto, and move it over here. And I'm just going to keep doing this, and move it over so we can get it at the second dial end, until I get a full circle. Alright, so now I'm all set, and I want to get this back at the starting point. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go under General Utilities, Center Elevator on Start. Alright, so if we hit play now, we will see that it'll go to the first waypoint, and then it will stop. If you don't want this behavior, which we don't, what we want to do is we want to make it stop here, and we want to make it stop here. So under stopping parameters, if we hit don't stop, it would just go all the way around, but it wouldn't really give the player a chance to get onto the elevator. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create stops. So if we see it's created the waypoints here. So if we hit waypoint 0, we see that's the first waypoint. And if we scroll down in the list, we see that waypoint 4 is the second point we want it to stop at. So we're going to drop down waypoint parameters, and at 0 and at 4, we're going to add as a stop. And under stopping parameters, you say stop at select waypoints. And we see the ones we've added as a stop, it will now stop at. We can demonstrate this in the view here. We'll see it'll go around, and it'll stop at the second one. And then it'll go back around to the first one. So we've got a pretty good setup running here. Just as another point, say I wanted to make it stop somewhere else. So if I added another waypoint here, and I wanted to make it stop on the other side, what I could do, and what I would actually recommend, is that when you get to the other side, instead of hitting the green add button, you hit the red add button. And what that automatically does is that automatically adds in a stop for you. So if we go around to here, and then to here, and then to here, we'll make a nice full circle. So center elevator on start. But if you go into the scene view, you'll see something. And you'll see that the elevator is actually acting very choppy. So if we were to, I'm just going to jump into the game here for a minute and try to get on the elevator before it leaves. But you'll notice that it's not very nice. It's not a very nice smooth movement. And what we're going to go into next is we're going to go into the parameters that control how exactly it goes between points. So, under here, that would be movement parameters. We have constant speed, slurped, lerped, smooth damp, and rigid body. What slurped is, and you're going to want to turn down the speed for this one. I'm going to set mine at 2 to see how that looks. What slurped is it's that kind of a function. So if this works well if it's a 2-point system and you just want it to get off to a fast start but then just slow to the stop of another one. And slurped and lerped are pretty close to being the same, but I'm pretty sure oftentimes what slurped will do is it will do more of a spherical path. So, you can use slurped and lerped if you want, but the ones that are really look the best are smooth damp and rigid body. So what smooth damp is the damping controls how fast it goes between these points and what the maximum speed is. So if I set the damping to something small like 0.2, that'll go between the points relatively fast. And if I leave the max speed up there, we'll see that it does this. As a note, if I were to take the maximum speed and I was to set it to something like 10, you'll see that it'll speed up at the beginning, but then it'll go slow in between the points. But you may have noticed something else undesirable at this point, and that is it stops at each of the waypoints in between, and it still looks pretty choppy. So what I'm going to show you is I'm going to show you something called the Overshoot parameter. So if I hit overshoots, what that basically says is that says aim beyond the target point. So if I set the overshoot distance to something like 10, that'll aim beyond the target, and you'll see that we get something smoother. If we want to go even smoother, what we can do is we're going to turn up this max speed and we're going to set this to something like 2. So you see that now we get a lot smoother looking transitions between the points. And that'll just keep going around. So that's how to use the overshoot parameter, and I highly recommend using that. If we want to use the next smoothing method, which is rigid body, what we're going to want to do is if you set it to that and then you enter in play mode, you'll see that it's not going to move anywhere. What you're going to do if you want rigid body is you're going to need to go component, physics, rigid body, and add a rigid body component. Obviously we don't want this to use gravity, and we're going to want to lock the rotation since this doesn't really need to move. So, if I was now to hit play, you'll see that it does move, and it'll move nicely in between these points, but you'll see that it's very uncontrolled. And you'll see that even more so if I turn up the force to say 200. and it just sort of wildly tries to get back to the waypoint. And sure, it'll probably do it eventually, or it'll just orbit, but that's not really so great. So what you want to do is you want to turn up the drag, and well, you don't really need to turn up the angular drag, but you want to at least turn up the drag. So what you get is you get something that sort of looks like the smooth damp function, and I'm going to turn this up. And a lot of this is just going to require just making small changes to values and previewing them until you get the elevator you want. And then it stops at its destination, and then it will head off to the next destination. So if you're going to do these elevators and you want nice smooth movement in between points, I highly recommend using either Rigidbody or Smooth Damp. So keep that in mind. And you'll notice something. And this is how to fix another one of the errors. You'll notice that at one of these points, let's see if it'll do it again. It does like the swing thing when it swings around. And that is caused by it actually missing the waypoint and having to go back and touch it. And this is where the general error comes in handy. If I was to set that general error to 1, I bet you that would eliminate that. But you'll also notice that it doesn't stay on its target as accurately as you might like. So that is a basic overview of how to use the elevator utility. What I'm also going to go over is I'm going to go over in general utilities. If you wanted to get rid of all the waypoints, you could hit remove all the waypoints, and that would remove all of these waypoints from the list here, but it wouldn't remove them as game objects. If you hit remove all waypoints destroy function, it not only removes the waypoints from the script, but it removes it from the scene view. So that's two of the functions in general utilities. Remove all stops. If I wanted to reconfigure the stops in here, I'd hit remove all stops and it would get rid of all the stops so I could re-input values. So we don't really need this right now, so I'm just going to hit remove all waypoints destroy function, and I'm going to show you. You don't even need a Rigidbody for this. You don't even need anything for this. I'm going to show you how to use elevator Bob. So this isn't someone's name, as you might think it is. Elevator Bob is actually a script that bobs the elevator up and down. So you might use this for something like this sci-fi looking hover pad, where you have the period, and this is magnitude and period, and those are, the period is how often it bobs up and down, and the magnitude is how much it bobs up and down. So if I set that to this to a high number and this to a low number, what we would end up with is we'd end up with something like this. So if you want to make your elevator hover up and down nicely, that's another script to use. That's about it. I hope this system will help you to make better elevators. I hope you enjoy it, and I hope you enjoy the art assets in the pack. And thank you for purchasing it if you have. And if you haven't, you might want to definitely consider this for your next project.